Folks, Cooper just finished 2 terms being the governor of North Carolina. Now he wants to be the next United States senator. Republican Senator Tom Tillis announced he was retiring. Democrats are really looking at this state as a huge, huge pickup for them to put them on the path to be able to regain control of the United States Senate. Last week, he and I had a conversation, and here it is. Before we get into it, we're recording this. It has been a very difficult morning for us at this show with the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., an iconic figure who, of course, went to college in your state, North Carolina A&T from South Carolina. Before we talk about your race, just want to allow you to share your thoughts about one of the most consequential figures of American history.
I'm so grateful for Reverend Jackson's life in North Carolina. We are proud of him because he was a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, the largest HBCU in the country, and often came back to North Carolina to see how we were doing and to help us out. I've had many conversations with him over the years. I think my last conversation with him was at the 2024 Democratic National Convention shortly before I gave my speech there. And still at that time, even though he had gotten sicker, his message was full of hope and optimism about where we could go. His life was difficult in that he had to be the battering ram to break down racial prejudices, and he fought them every day. Yet he was amazing at making people feel a sense of confidence, a sense of self-worth. His I am somebody speeches that he would give, particularly to young people, you could see it in their eyes. And he was an inspiration to me, to many people here in North Carolina who loved and revered him, not only because he was such a great civil rights figure, but because he was one of us, a North Carolinian. At least we claimed him, but we know what he meant not only to this country, but to the world. And today is a day of mourning, but it's also a day to celebrate his life, because his life was worth celebrating. He made a difference in this world, no question.
Not only that, one of the things that people don't realize, when he ran in 1984 and 88, and I have had the opportunity to meet many of these people, he had long coattails. What people don't realize is there were African Americans and non-African Americans who supported him, who were elected to city councils, commissioners court, sheriffs, school board, state reps, state senate, because of his run in 84 and 88, the 2 million plus people putting on the voting rolls. Listen, Richard Shelby is not a United States senator in Alabama without Reverend Jackson run. Now, he rewarded Democrats by flipping the Republican Party, but the bottom line is he's not a United States senator. And so I remember when I was on CNN and Bill Bennett made this comment on the night of the South Carolina primary. He said, Reverend Jackson winning this was Black history. Obama winning was American history. And I tore into him and I said, you have no idea what the hell you're talking about in laying out the role that he played. And when it came to this issue of voting, which we're still dealing with, and he really understood the power of the ballot.
No question. The fact that he inspired confidence and motivated so many people to run for office and to be involved in politics, he knew that governmental policy was a key to not only success in the Black community, but success for everyone, particularly people who were being left behind by the system, that the power rested with the people. And today we are still fighting the voting battles, but Reverend Jackson taught us how to engage and taught us how to meet the moment And I think it's time for all of us to come together and meet the moment right now, just as he would want us to do.
I was with him in November and sitting by his bedside when many of us believed he was going to be passing in a few days. His organs were shutting down. And we were sitting there talking about public policy. And he asked his son, Yusef, for one of a sip of Coke. And as we were talking, we're just all around him, you could see he was getting revived. And he was talking about organizing pastors and about feeding the poor. And so when we talk about public policy today, you're running for the United States Senate. Bishop William Barber always talks about this here, how you have the poor and the working class in this country who rarely gets talked about in campaigns. Politicians always say the middle class, the middle class, the middle class, the middle class built America. But you got poor and working folk. You got rural folks there in North Carolina. You got folks not living in major cities. And so as I think about, obviously, the issue that Reverend Jackson raised in 84 and 88, here we are in 2026, still dealing with those issues. How does that inform you of what you want to accomplish if you are elected to the United States Senate from North Carolina?
Look, I see that there's so many people looking up at the middle class, wanting to get in and feeling right now that they don't have an opportunity to do that. And you have to look at what somebody's done to tell what they're going to do. And as governor, I fought for those people who are looking up at the middle class and trying to get in. I recognize that so many people are struggling with rent and utility bills and juggling childcare and paying more for groceries and having to look after parents and grandparents. And for so many families, there's just too much month at the end of the money. And what I want is to cut back the tax breaks that the very wealthiest and the corporations are getting and invest in the people who are really making this country go. One of the big battles that we fought here in North Carolina was expanding Medicaid. We know that when Obamacare was passed, that they gave the states an individual option to make a choice. Are you going to fill in that gap between people who are making too much to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough to qualify for the subsidies under the Affordable Care Act? We worked and fought and put together coalitions of people, and there's still 10 other states in the South that haven't done it, that are leaving people behind. But in North Carolina, we did it. Now we have more than 700,000 people who have health insurance who didn't have it before. And I will never forget handing Penny her very first health insurance card. There were tears in her eyes and admittedly tears in mine, but I kept thinking about the fact that we are the richest country in the world. We ought to be able to find a way to make sure that everybody has affordable, quality health care. And people tell me, I haven't been to Washington yet. I've spent my time serving in North Carolina. And they say health care is the bear. You need to watch out for the bear in Washington. I am ready to wrestle the bear. We wrestled it in North Carolina, got more people health insurance, but now we see this big, beautiful bill that's trying to take it all away, that's reduced the number of people who are getting health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, that's making people buy policies that have deductibles that are so high that they can't afford them, that their premiums they can't afford. It is time for this country to step up and recognize that for a better workforce, and just for the fact that I believe it's morality, it's a morals for us to step up and make sure that people have health care. And I look forward to doing that when I get into the United States Senate, is wrestling that bear and getting more people in this country the health insurance that they deserve.
Health insurance obviously is a critical issue. Also, what's happening economically. Folks are talking about housing affordability, food prices, and things along those lines. And no state is immune from that. And so when it comes to those issues, people are always asking, well, what can a U.S. senator do about food prices? What can they do about houses, building more housing stock? And so let's talk about those priorities.
Well, first, we can, as a Congress, take back the constitutional authority on trade and tariffs that this president has hijacked and that my opponent in this race, Michael Whatley, supports. Those tariffs are raising prices on small business and consumers and farmers. I was meeting with a group of black farmers the other day telling me how difficult it was and how these tariffs are hurting them. So taking back that authority and wiping those tariffs off the books to help lower the price for food and other items that people pay. Secondly, making sure that we put more energy on the grid. The big, beautiful bill took away clean energy that was going to help lower utility bills because it was going to provide more power. And now you're seeing utility bills go up, partly because of this administration pushing power companies to fossil fuels and even back to coal that is so expensive that it's going to end up costing everyday consumers. And clearly, affordable housing is an issue that has plagued us for decades, and many cities have tackled it. I firmly believe that we need to try to narrow and streamline permitting processes to get more people to invest in affordable housing across this country. We need to work closely not only with state and local government, but with nonprofits. It's critical. It's part of the American dream is making sure that people have the opportunity for affordable housing. And it will certainly be high on my agenda because all in all, stuff just costs too much in this country right now. Wages are not keeping up with it. And as a Senate, I want to go up there. I know I'll be one of 100, but I do have experience serving as a governor and solving problems at that level. I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure those things become a reality for people.
When we think about help from the federal government, I get a kick out of Republicans who love to talk about we don't want the federal government's help. Yet when the natural disasters, it's amazing how they want help. When it comes to roads, it's amazing why they help. But they're taxpayers. You've had to deal with Donald Trump penalizing North Carolina after the devastating hurricane there, penalizing the state and literally saying no, and not just North Carolina, but also there were in Missouri and Arkansas, other places along those lines. And so what also has to happen, I think, people need to understand the role that U.S. senators play when it comes to things along those lines. And so how will you make that case to the voters that it is much better to have you as a Democrat representing them than to have a MAGA Republican representing them who sides with Donald Trump?
Well, first, my opponent, Michael Whatley, was appointed by the president as the federal recovery czar for Western North Carolina. He's been a complete failure. This was the biggest natural disaster that North Carolina has ever faced. Western North Carolina devastated. $60 billion plus needed for them to recover. So far, only 12% of those needs have been provided by the federal government, when in other major storms across the country, we've seen 60, 70 or higher percent coverage by the federal government. We need, they talk a big game about how they're going to help, and then they disappear when it's time to govern. And that's why D.C. is broken. It's run by Washington, D.C. insiders. My opponent, Michael Whatley, has worked for Republicans on the Hill. He's been a big oil lobbyist and made money off of being on the inside in Washington. We need to break up this chaos in Washington and make it more effective and responsive to the people. And as a senator from North Carolina, I'm going to be listening to those everyday people, hearing from them as I go about my work and working for them and those challenges, not the big corporations, not the billionaires who are continuing to try and get their own tax breaks while cutting help for everybody else, that is wrong. And I'm going to work to put a stop to it.
One of the things that I have said in the time that I've spent in North Carolina covering elections is that so much time, energy is focused on the western portion of the state. In many ways, East North Carolina doesn't get the same level of attention. That's called the Black Belt. And so what is your campaign focus on voters there? Voters in Rocky Mount, in Fayetteville, Elizabeth City, those places that again, often don't get the same level of attention from campaigns as the western portion of the state?
Well, first, I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, went to public schools in Eastern North Carolina. My children went to public schools in Eastern North Carolina. I practiced law there and represented everyday people and small businesses. When I was governor, we worked to make sure that Medicaid was expanded, and rural North Carolina benefited probably more than any other demographic because they needed insurance, and particularly they needed insurance to keep rural hospital doors open. We also worked to recruit businesses to rural North Carolina and put significant specific performance-based incentives into luring companies to come to our rural parts of the state because we knew that it would be less expensive for them, but it would be good paying jobs for the people who work there. But we know that people across Eastern North Carolina are struggling. My campaign is going to be paying attention to them and listening to their strife right now. I think that the affordability crisis is hitting them as hard as anybody else. And look, I think you talk about the Black Belt in Eastern North Carolina. It's critical that government look like the people that it serves and protects. And it's one of the reasons why my governorship, we had the most diverse cabinet and the most diverse administration in the history of North Carolina. I believe it was the very best. It was the most responsive. If you look at corporations and companies that are out there and trying to sell products, they want their employees to look like the customers they serve because they're more successful. And the bottom line is better. I think it's important for us to celebrate our diversity and to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to succeed in North Carolina. I will put that at the top of my agenda, is making sure that we are remembering people who are out there. What's happening in North Carolina that the Republican legislature has done, and Congress, this I can't say it's a do-nothing Congress, because when you're eliminating the Department of Education and you're reducing the federal funding to education that comes to the states and the local schools, you're really hurting the future of these young children's lives. And with public education, that's where real opportunity comes. And I will fight for education, just as I did as governor. I will fight for education in Washington.
Last question for you on this, and this won't be our last conversation, but trust in the system. I have heard from so many African Americans who say, my vote doesn't count, it doesn't matter. I've never seen anything in my community change, and the couch is an option. The number of African Americans who did not vote in the 2024 presidential election in North Carolina is significant. Huge numbers in Georgia. There was a drop in turnout for Vice President Harris in 2024 than it was for Biden in 2020. And so to that young person, to that middle-aged person, that older African American voter who is saying, I simply do not believe that these folks care about me, my life will not change. What does Roy Cooper say to that person who's watching and listening right now when it comes to the upcoming primary and then the general election?
That I get it. I understand why you feel that way. I understand why you are frustrated, because I've heard it myself. I have been out amongst our churches and community centers and have heard that very thing, that I'm struggling in my life and nothing seems to make it better. And why should I go and vote? There has never been a bigger difference between candidates than in this election. You have an administration in Washington that not only is neglecting people who are struggling, people who are trying to get ahead, but they are actively working to make it harder for them. And then on top of that, they're making it harder for them to vote if they even do decide to vote. So if there ever was a chance to do something and to make a difference, it is now, because clearly the people in power now do not want people who are behind and who are struggling to vote, because they're afraid that those people would vote them out as they should. We're going to be listening to our communities. There will be trusted members of communities across North Carolina who will be talking with you and listening to you about your challenges and bringing them to me in my campaign. I want to make a difference. I want to make sure that